What a week for video game news. EA is going private in a mammoth $55 billion deal. Xbox has raised the price of its top Game Pass tier by 50%. And we're going to talk Battlefield 6 versus Call of Duty. Hello and welcome to the Game Business Show. I am joined today by a brilliant analyst, advisor, consultant, author, someone I've known for a long time, and I can't believe I've only just invited onto the Game Business Show. Welcome, Joost van Dreunen. Have I got that right, Joost? Have I got that right?
That's perfect. Thank you for having me.
What's going on in your world, Joost? I mean, I really want to plug your newsletter. I think it's amazing. But what's new for you?
What's new for me is, of course, there's a lot of news, and what that means is I end up, the things that might seem obvious to us as people that look at the games industry all the time, I then spend 2-3 days of my week explaining to non-gaming folk what it's all about. And it's almost like you have to explain to them what EA does.
Yeah.
So it's some starter level education, but it's good to hear the questions that they have, right? It's the scrutiny that they bring. I like that.
Yeah.
So that's new. And it's, on the personal note, like school has started here in Brooklyn. So the kids are finally back at school after a summer of breaking my house. So I'm excited. I'm excited to have some bandwidth.
Well, it's similar for me. I get like the BBC or CNN or the Chinese news agency will call me up and ask for that sort of stuff. And one thing I always try and struggle with is making sure that I explain it to people that don't even know what do you mean by a shooter game? That kind of you have to go down to that level. But I guess because you teach people, you must be able to quite articulate in explaining complicated things.
I try to. Sure.
Yeah.
It's they find me because of that. And so then, it's challenging though to explain at 2 a.m. to some news agency in China exactly the differences between all of these games and titles and companies. But, it's part of the job, but I find that conversation just in general is fascinating. Like, the games industry as I experience it, and this too, is like there are so few of us in each of these categories that it becomes an echo chamber immediately, right? The number of journalists, reporters, analysts, it's never enough, not nearly relative to its size. And so it runs a risk of everybody sort of agreeing constantly or forgetting to look outside, which is why I always welcome those perspectives.
So this is perfectly line up what I was going to say about your newsletter, which you can get at Super Joost. Your Substack, I do recommend. You can just go on the Game Business. We push it and promote it. Is that you every time you write something, it's I feel challenged or informed or inspired by it.
Thanks.
My job is to really talk to people. So I go around and I get people's opinions all the time, and everyone ends up reaching a sort of consensus on what the industry is and what it's going to do because they're all talking to the same people and we're all just saying the same things in one big circle. And then you'll say something which doesn't contradict things necessarily, but it definitely comes at a completely different angle. And I think it's super valuable. Everyone should read it. That's my advice.
I appreciate that. That's high praise. Thank you. Well,
let's talk about. I'd be interested to hear your views. I mean, I know you've already written about them, about the big story of the week. Probably the biggest story of the year. I don't know if I even need to repeat it. EA has signed an agreement with an investor group to become a private company. The investors mounting the takeover include Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, PIF, and US-based private equity firm Silver Lake Management and Affinity Partners. Affinity Partners is run by Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. I mean, the key takeaway, Andrew Wilson, who is the CEO of EA, will continue to be the CEO of EA. I think the deal is expected to close, is it end of Q1 financial year 27, so end of June. The deal consists of equity investment of around $36 billion and then $20 billion of debt financing committed by JP Morgan Chase Bank. There's an awful lot of quotes in the release about being committed to the company and investing, but it's the usual placeholder, meaningless statements that don't really mean anything. And we'll reassure nobody. Lots of people have different views on this, although there is a lot of negativity around it. What was your immediate reaction? Was that it didn't add up?
It didn't add up. And I mean that in a literal sense of the 25% premium on top of the market value of EA, based on just sort of a basic analysis of its financials, suggests that there's more going on than just like a leveraged buyout. In simple terms, like why would you borrow this much money on this type of asset if you didn't have some ulterior motive? And so the reason it doesn't add up is because it's very much part of a soft power play by Saudi Arabia, right? It's the same reason they've been investing in sports and buying soccer celebrities to come over and play there. For the same reason we had a lot of dust last week with American stand-up comedians having sort of this rift between them, like who went out there to the Riyadh Comedy Festival and who didn't. And so there is this large sponsor of entertainment, and they have their own agenda, and it's rippling throughout the entertainment ecosystem, and now it's hit gaming in a big way.
Yeah.
That's why it doesn't quite add up in terms of finances.
It's great for shareholders, certainly. There was a few things I noted. I did think, obviously, because of their success with Scopely, which is linked to the Saudi Arabia investment, EA's mobile business is probably one of the bigger opportunities actually within that organisation. I know that EA has been a consistent performer, but not particularly. It does feel like they hit a bit of a ceiling as a company. But there's things like mobile where I felt was an opportunity for them, which I guess this might help them unlock. Mm-hmm. So I was trying to find where the synergies might be, where the opportunities might be. I guess a lot of the concerns is this debt and what that's going to mean to EA staff, what it means for certain ones of their franchises. Are they going to have to improve the cash flow in order to service the debt? That seems to be one of the overriding comments, certainly in the echo chamber that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, any private equity activity is generally followed by layoffs in sort of a bloodbath, if nothing else, right? It's sort of part of the exercise where you take company X private or whatever, you put it under a new owner, and then a bunch of people come in with spreadsheets and machetes and they start cutting it down to size, breaking it into pieces. They look for margins and profits and blah, blah, blah. And then they either sell off some of the components or they cast it back out. They create some IPO moment or whatever. That's sort of the general story around this. In this case, there is some reason to believe that that's not their immediate objective, right? So there is, of course, the simplest answer is probably the correct one, but let's for a moment assume that they are in fact serious about leveraging the largest US-based game publisher as a way to bring attention to their region and to establish themselves as a hub for interactive entertainment. It's not in their interest to immediately start cutting people out in that sense. I suspect that there's going to be some requirement for people to move to Riyadh or some of these places, and they're not going to want to do that. So there's probably going to be some shuffling of chairs in that regard. But it doesn't on paper seem logical for me to immediately start cutting into it. What I expect, to put it differently, is like the activity that will likely happen is that they're going to separate more prominently EA Sports and everything else. It's already the case, of course, internally, but they're going to just make that two separate entities where all of the sports components will live their own life in the broader sports ecosystem that they're building. And the shooter games and the Sims and all of those, there's probably going to be a smaller subsidiary there. And then there's going to be a bucket, like a portfolio of all the stuff that you know and love, but haven't played for years, like Command & Conquer or Ultima or SSX. And I'm guessing they're going to sell that off to the highest bidder. And they're going to use that to pay down the debts a little bit, because that doesn't really serve their strategic soft power play.
Yeah, that's the bit that you find that the gaming media is most worried about is BioWare, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Maybe EA Motive and the Star Wars games, the Sims and the sports games and the shooter games. They might even get more investment. I don't think you can invest much more in how much they've spent on Battlefield, but we'll come back to that. But certainly those other titles is where perhaps the anxiety is, because even EA has never been the most altruistic of companies. Like we're not dealing with a business that heavily invested in niche things, but they did it from time to time. They'd be, go on, that small team can make a Dead Space remake, or go on there and try a Mirror's Edge sequel. There were times that they would give things, because they might have a team spare, or because they wanted to develop some talent, or whatever it was that the strategy there was. So there was always a little bit of it, and that's the stuff that is probably most under threat. But EA's cut that stuff before. They've made some cuts themselves, including to the Black Panther game that they cut, which they did quite recently. So they do those sort of things. I guess another part of me is there's just a little bit less visibility as a result of another company going private. That's even less visibility on game performance. That as someone who loves to track this stuff, it's quite it's good for data companies.
Yeah, I mean, look, like there's no losing condition in that, but it's the fact that it will now be private. Yeah, it's true. Like we'll have less visibility, like what's really going on. Like you won't be able to tell as much because they're not mandated to share. That seems to be the case. Like I remember the current U.S. administration already suggesting that American companies stop reporting on a quarterly basis anyway. So that seems to be the thing that they want to do regardless. I mean, look, I get it. Like I provide data for a living and I am an analyst. So like that doesn't hurt me, but it makes my job harder too, right? In that sense. So the reason companies tend to do that is because they don't want eyes and influence on their operations. And so you could be cynical about it and say like, what are they doing that they don't want us to see? Or, and I did this analysis a few weeks ago, like if you look at the long-term differences between privately held and publicly traded firms, privately held companies are actually more innovative because they can think of longer timelines than publicly traded ones, which have to show something that goes up and to the right every 3 months. Right? Every quarter, you got to show progress or increase or improvement of some kind. Otherwise, your investors, and they will leave you by the dozens. Like we saw this with the CD Projekt. Like they abandoned that stock when that didn't turn out to meet expectations. So, in many ways, like being publicly traded is somewhat of a curse too. Which is not to say that now suddenly EA is going to be this benevolent, altruistic company, as you say, right? It's from the people that brought you Pink Darth Vader comes now, free money. No, so it's going to end up being somewhat of a cultural shift, but they might have a little bit more breathing room to pursue and invest in innovative things that we haven't seen from them before. But that's probably a small consolation to what most players will think is, a bad decision.
I've never really seen EA, particularly in recent years, as being the most innovative company. They're often the most reactive. They'll go, everyone's playing Destiny, BioWare, make me one of those. And, or everyone's I remember, I think went to see them once. They showed me 2 MOBAs they're working on. I'm not sure either of them came out in the end, but they were because MOBAs were a thing, and there was just an element of this is the genre everyone's pushing into. We'll push into it as well, and we'll spend as much money as we can to try and succeed in that market. And most of the time, it doesn't work. Yeah, so be interested if that is an innovative, if they start down that route instead.
Well, we'll see. I mean, there must be some pent up like creative tension in there somewhere, but it's the nature of the portfolio, right? It's the heavy reliance on sports video games, which is all the licensed materials, which is very strictly regulated by the owners. And, you simply can't make a lot of changes to the gameplay of football or golf or whatever, any of those games, because then they stop being a realistic counterparts to their physical form. So in those terms, like by nature of its portfolio, EA has always had like the minimal amount of room to innovate. And so maybe it never really developed that. They did a good job at Frostbite and a bunch of their technical innovations once they divested from FIFA. Mm-hmm. They really took it serious then, and I think that paid off. I think including all-female soccer teams and the female soccer leagues, I thought that was innovative and new for them. I thought that the way that they allow you to experience the play and the replay and sort of like the highlight moments in the game. So they have a way of pushing that forward. It's just, will that be better in a privately held circumstance? Will it be a catalyst for it? We'll have to see. I think they're going to be very distracted in becoming first and foremost integrated with the larger Saudi Arabian strategy.
Also, there's a lot of concerns, anxieties amongst some of the members of teams. They're not just because of the potential for layoffs. They're not entirely happy, but their management has jumped into bed with which is always going to be the case. I mean, Ubisoft with Yves Guillemot quietly going over there and doing some talks and things. There's an element of they're aware of the political sensitivities around this, but I think the industry needs money. China's and the Chinese companies have had it their way for a while, and this is the latest pot of gold, I guess.
It's a microcosm of what happens in the world at large, right? I mean, money decides everything, right? It's cash rules everything around me all over again. And so here we have an industry that's been sort of weak. Particularly EA has been underperforming to Take-Two. Battlefield 6, I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Also, by the grace of Strauss-Zelnick delaying the launch of GTA 6 months. So, it gave it the runway that it needed to succeed in the holiday season of 2025. So, you have to wonder, it's like, in a moment like that, a check like that, $55 billion makes a big difference. But it also sets a different tone, right? Games have never really been regarded as this mouthpiece for any kind of political idea, even though, of course, they're totally cultural entrenched and they have certain practices and beliefs in there. So it's not unfair to raise the question, what's going to happen to the gay couples in The Sims?
Yeah.
Under this new ownership, right? Is that going to go away? Is that going to spin it off because it doesn't match their agenda? Look, it's their asset. They can do whatever they want, but you could argue it's like that might not fly.
Yeah, that's sort of the concern. Well, I mean, this story's going to run around. We'll be talking about it all the time. And I don't think we've seen the last of Saudi's investment in the game space by any stretch. Our next story, at the time of recording, is only just breaking, which is that Xbox has increased the price of Game Pass Ultimate. It's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not just an increase for Game Pass Ultimate. It's a big increase. It's up 50%. It's $29.99 up from $19.99. But they're bolstering it in quite a significant way. So they're including the Ubisoft Plus Classics collection in the service. They're also adding in Fortnite Crew service, which is the Fortnite subscription offering. The firm also pledges to release more than 75 day one games into Game Pass Ultimate every year. There is a slight increase as well for the PC Game Pass. That's going up by more than a third to $16.50 and $13.50. And they're also rebranding the other Game Pass tiers, but they're not, well, maybe in some markets, but not in the US, they're not increasing the price of those. So Game Pass Core is now called Game Pass Essential. Game Pass Standard is now called Game Pass Premium. They're both going to maintain their prices, but they've got extra stuff in it, including some more games, and Microsoft's expanding cloud gaming to all its subscription offerings. I've got some stats here, Joost, but what was your initial reaction to that?
I got to play the analyst here and say, I told you so. About a year ago, I wrote a piece and it's like they are going to and should increase the premium tier for Game Pass to $30. And that has everything to do with just the mechanics of like, you can't have the lower half of your subscriber base, which really only plays some of the games some of the times, pay the same amount as the people that just eat it, right? So the economics are very simply put, if you don't differentiate, then the poor players, they subsidize the wealthier, more affluent, the more intensive players. And so that doesn't make any sense. But particularly in a Game Pass setting where they rely on cloud gaming infrastructure and streaming it, which according to my math costs something like 42 cents per streaming hour of game time. If you play more than so many hours, what you end up getting is basically, someone who gets 100 hours a month for the price of like 10, 15, 20 hours. And so they don't pay their fair share. By offering day and date and exclusive and all these other features to premium players, they're actually covering their own expense. And the cheaper versions of the subscription don't subsidize the high intensity players. That's sort of the basic mechanics. That's sort of what you see with Netflix, Spotify as well. And so they're just following that example.
I mean, yeah, there's some stats here. The average Game Pass Ultimate subscriber, they would have to have spent $550 just to buy all the games that they play in a year. That's the average. But Game Pass, this is the other statistic though, which sort of backs up their decision not to raise the price of the other tiers, is that Game Pass subscribers spend the majority of their time playing catalog titles. So there's the other element of the people that do get Game Pass Ultimate because they want the new games. They actually don't represent the majority of players. The majority of players seem to be preferred to play the catalog. Is what they do. Obviously, this is a second price increase in a year. Just over. If you go from August 24, Game Pass Ultimate has seen a price increase by nearly 77%. Mm-hmm. But look, Sakana's got some data here. So Sakana sent me some statistics, which I thought was quite fascinating. When it comes to people who unsubscribe from Game Pass, mm-hmm. So they got this Q3 survey. So when people unsubscribe from Game Pass, and not just Game Pass, but Nintendo Switch Online and PS Plus, they said it's because the price doesn't, though they like the service, the price was just too much. And there's some other people that have said the price is too much. The second reason why they unsubscribe, the price is too much for what they get out of it. So there will clearly be some lost customers as a result of it. But I suspect the majority of people, because what is $10 a month? That's It's barely 2 coffees from Starbucks in 2025, right? I mean, it seems like a lot over the course of the year. I guess it's almost the price of 2 AAA games. But if you're somebody that is super engaged in this ecosystem, and you've now got Ubisoft games in there as well, and you've got stuff for, you've always had stuff for Riot, you've got stuff for Call of Duty, now you've got stuff for Fortnite, and you've got even more streaming components, even more rewards. It literally lives up to its name. It is the ultimate. It is the ultimate subscription service in many ways.
Is that the one you would take?
Well, no, but what I find interesting about subscription services is it's different for different people. And this is the reason why I think chucking more stuff in doesn't necessarily change stuff. If you're never interested in Ubisoft games, the inclusion of Ubisoft isn't going to make this more valuable to you. For me, the one I actually use the most is the Nintendo Switch Online service, which I think on paper is probably the weakest of them all. But the reason why I use it is because I'm 40 and I grew up with Nintendo games. So I like playing old Nintendo games. I do it a lot. And therefore I get the most value out of that service because it appeals to that element of me. Game Pass is probably the one I use the least for that reason, because I'm a bit retro-y. But I can see the value of it. I mean, actually, I was trying to think about this from over the course of this year just gone, actually. Game Pass this year is like proper good, right? So because Call of Duty Black Ops 6 came out, we've had India. I was trying to sit there and think, would I have bought, it's about 5 games, the cost of Game Pass Ultimate now. Would I have bought 5 games from Game Pass over the last year? And I started to think about it, and I actually thought, this year might have done that, because I would have got Indiana Jones, and maybe I wouldn't have got Call of Duty, but I definitely would have played it. I was interested in Avowed, and I gave that a go. And then you start getting into Doom: The Dark Ages and Claire Obscure and Oblivion. And for me, I love Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4. And so I'm up to 6 or 7 games now that's come out this year. New ones, brand new ones that have been released over the last year. And they're promising to do even more going forward. I actually think it's a good service. And I think if you are somebody who is engaged in that ecosystem, I suspect nobody likes a price rise, but I think it's more digestible, more palatable than perhaps it looks.
Yes, I think it's a fair value for money. Like the problem, and I'll get right to it, which is, as a consumer, just awesome. Thanks. I'll pay for this. It's all, I'll pay for all of them. I have the PlayStation 1, Nintendo 1, because they're all like worth their salt. The problem is not the demand side, it's the supply side. Like, how do you build a business as a publisher in a sort of fixed fee ecosystem like this? Like, the same thing happened to musicians. Streaming became a marketing channel more than anything else, because there's no money in streaming for musicians unless you're Taylor Swift or Drake or something like that, right? Unless you have billions of plays. So in other words, like, what does that mean long term for the supply side? Like, can you be a sustainable AA indie in that ecosystem? And, currently these subscription providers are all kind of competing with each other, so they'll probably be fine for a while, but it's a very tough thing for game makers. But the players of games, this is just the best time ever. They get all this very cheap subsidized content, even $30 a month. Like, annually, of course, that's a substantial amount of money, but you get premium everything. Like, it's, what does Disney cost and what does Netflix cost? Like, all of those offer their own unique catalog of IP and shows and things to consume in some ways. And they are inching towards $20-$30. My consideration then is not so much to look at the top end for the super users, but the bottom. Like, you remember that Xbox had this bunch of documents leaked during the regulatory investigation around the Activision Blizzard purchase. And that also revealed at the time, and it's probably updated now, but that they were eyeing 100 million Game Pass subscribers. Now, let's say that that's still true in some capacity. We don't know. They don't tell us any numbers, but let's say that they are about halfway that point now. To get the other 50 million in the pool, they're going to have to offer something that's cheaper, right? And so then I'm thinking $10 a month or maybe $6 a month on mobile. That would make sense to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's what's going to drive the audience. And so they have to first build all this perceived value at the top, and then you can have the cheaper $6 a month, maybe ad-funded version of it on the lower end. And then you can also have a Game Pass subscription.
Yeah.
That's very secret.
The thing that jumped out to me was the fact that the lower tiers aren't increasing in price, but they are increasing in what's in them.
Mm-hmm.
they've got the streaming in there now. They've got more games in there to try and make it more appealing. And Circana's data, I mean, Circana have reported, okay, this is spending. It's not necessarily the number of subscribers, but they've seen game subscriptions between January 2025, end of January to July, end of July 2025, 19% increase in US spending on video game subscriptions. Now that doesn't just include Game Pass and Nintendo Switch Online, which also saw a boost. We'll see the boost around Switch 2. But it also includes PC MMO stuff and all those sort of things. It doesn't include mobile. So, we have, and there's been, I think if I remember correctly, March all the way to July, that was 5 consecutive months of growth in terms of game subscribers. So you're starting to see a bit, and Matt at Circana, he speculates that it's the cost, the cost of games has got to a point where this is now seen as a viable way for people to pay for their games. I don't know. I'm not convinced. I can see the argument, and so there's an element, I think, from a consumer point of view of game subscription services looking more appealing from purely in terms of their own wallets, and increasing the lower end, but not improving the lower end tiers, but not increasing the price. I guess might play into that potential.
That's consistent with the sort of economic cycle we're in, right? So, what's selling us from a content perspective, I mean, you said so just now, which is, I like the Nintendo inventory. Nintendo launches new IPs sometimes, but mostly it's the Marios and the Zeldas and stuff. And so it's very consistent IP, which is exactly what you'd expect during a weaker market. People cling to what they know because they know it has value. We're late in the current hardware cycle. So console makers think, and they're sort of geared to think this way, where you have a risk-averse consumer base that doesn't really want to spend a lot of money. And so they offer them like all of the good stuff for a reasonable price, exactly like you're describing. And so after several years of looking towards innovating around the cool content that we could build, now all these companies are trying to figure out how to innovate around distribution. And subscriptions are a clear example of distribution innovation, where we can just reach more people at differentiated price points and do it in such a way that they actually want to be involved and are excited about it, right? This probably wouldn't have happened 5 years ago.
No. And whenever I talk about game subscriptions, I get some people that will say to me that they're worried about the impact this is going to have on the market and, what it means for sales of premium games generally. And, these changes aren't necessarily going to alleviate any of those concerns. But I think we've got to the point with consumer spending under threat generally and discoverability being such a major issue. This clearly helps with that kind of situation. And
100%.
And so although there'll be downsides. I mean, you've talked about some of the impact on profitability it's had for, margin, the fact that, somebody else, I watched the Rest is Entertainment podcast in the UK that they named a really famous pop musician that would earn from her music. All she gets is minimum wage from Spotify. It's like a proper superstar, Alison Moyer or whatever. And earns minimum wage from Spotify. That's that situation. So I guess that's where the concerns come in, and that's when more revenue streams are needed. Yeah. But it's a different conversation than this one, I suspect. We could be here all day for that one.
100%. I'm excited to see like Xbox trying to play with the model. I do like that they push this forward and that they're sort of relentless. Like I know that, which is not to defend them, but like a lot of people look at it with some skepticism. It's like, well, where is it? We had this big deal. I mean, in the wake of the EA privatization, you had the Activision Blizzard purchase. Okay, you spend all this money. Where's the thing? And they're working on it. They keep rolling out. They keep sort of being relentless about pushing this. So there's still a pulse to all of this. They haven't abandoned it. So I'm optimistic about that part. But it's tough. Like it's a big boat trying to turn its course, right? It's we'll see what comes of it. Yeah, I'm curious to see.
Well, because we had I rattle through a bunch of stories because there've been so many big ones this week. I've focused on those too, but there is another. The topic I was going to bring to the table, but this was planned before the EA news broke. I was going to talk about Battlefield 6 versus Call of Duty. And interestingly, Joost, I didn't know that you'd already written about this. I read it just before this call. So this is a topic you're also familiar with. So you're great topic about this because it is. You can oversell it a little bit because I think it's worth. Again, I've got a lot of data, so I'm not going to read it all out at once because otherwise it would just be a string of me reading out numbers.
Data to me, I like
it. But if you talk about Battlefield, so this is US data. It's not too dissimilar in the UK actually. Battlefield is the 16th biggest franchise in US according to Sakana. That's his lifetime revenue, game dollar sales as they call it. So it's just behind Need for Speed, but it's ahead of The Sims. So that's number 16 for Battlefield. Number 1 is Call of Duty. Battlefield 1 is the franchise's best performing game in terms of dollar sales. That's slightly ahead of Battlefield 4. Battlefield 1, this came out in 2016. It was actually the number 2 overall game of the year in terms of game revenue. Number 1, Call of Duty. And also Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, one of the lesser Call of Duties. 2018's Battlefield 5 didn't do very well at all. It was number 16 for the year. 2021's Battlefield 2042 was number 5, so it did better. But number 1, Call of Duty. Number 3, Call of Duty. There was 2 Call of Duty games ahead of it. In 2024, Call of Duty is still finished as the US best-selling franchise in terms of dollar sales. That's the 16th consecutive year Call of Duty has been number 1 in the US. Now, there has been years where Grand Theft Auto 5, Red Dead Redemption 2, and Hogwarts Legacy have finished as the best individual selling game. But in terms of a franchise, that includes the previous year's titles and that kind of stuff. Call of Duty has been number 1 every year for 16 years on the trot. So yes, Call of Duty versus Battlefield, always a very, very exciting story. But if you look through it historically, there's only ever been one winner. It's been a very one-sided battle. And one thing I'd like to point out about Call of Duty versus Battlefield, and it's always a fun thing to talk about, and there are some reasons to believe Battlefield might get quite a bit closer this year, or maybe even win, who knows, is that Battlefield and Call of Duty are not actually the same game. I don't know if you're a player, Joost, but they are obviously war shooters. They're similar settings and that kind of stuff. But Battlefield is a large scale game. It has vehicles and it's a big focus on teamwork with giant maps and that kind of stuff. Call of Duty is faster paced, close quarters combat, smaller, tighter maps. So the point being is that if you are somebody who likes Call of Duty, you won't necessarily like Battlefield. It's not like this experience is the same. It's not like it's transferable. It's not like going from PlayStation to Xbox or doing. They are different experiences, albeit ones that are similar in setting. Are you a player, Joost? Are you a big?
It's my job, so I play. But I've also conceded I play these for fun. I just. Off topic, like whenever these things come out, of course, I go through the campaigns, I try out the multiplayer components, and then they either fade to the background or they don't. I like the Call of Duty franchise, of course. I'm shit at all of them in a multiplayer setting. Like, I'm not afraid to admit this. And of those, I like the large-scale battles with the breakable environments a little better because I can lean a little bit more on my team to like not die all the time. So it's so yes, I play them, but the military shooters to me, they have a limit. There's sort of a ceiling to it, just in general.
Oh, okay.
The from a franchise perspective, I could make an argument that they're not the same game at all. Like you say, like it's the gameplay mechanics are so different that it's almost comparing football to soccer, or football to American football, to say it properly. And it's they look the same. They involve a bunch of grown men in shorts chasing a ball, but they're not played the same way at all. And so perhaps there is the Venn diagram of overlap for the consumer base is very different than you might think, right? It's a much more social thing, perhaps in that sense. It's much less about the prestige. The Call of Duty is really big on like the recognition and the skins and so on. They are the ones that bring, Nicki Minaj into the fold for whatever reason. And it's a very different mindset, It's like that what the Battlefield's trying to do.
I think the connection. There's a connect. This isn't really. I've got some more data, and I'll come back to it in a second. But one of my favorite stories in the games industry is the story of Call of Duty and EA and Medal of Honor. And I might have told it on the show before, but I've definitely written about it before. And I don't know how familiar you are with it, Joost. But so. One of the key people who are leading this Battlefield resurgence, it's a huge investment EA has made. The person sort of driving it is Vince Zampella.
Mm-hmm.
And Vince Zampella goes all the way back throughout the whole arc of this big long story that goes back 25 years plus. So he was part of 2015 Inc. along with Jason West and a bunch of other people making Medal of Honor Allied Assault, which was excellent. It was an excellent game. EA had this idea that actually they wanted to put all their Medal of Honor developers and in a big new studio in LA, and invited the 2015 Inc. developers to come and work out of EA LA and become part of that organization. They didn't really want to do that. They didn't want to break up as a team. They didn't want going to LA was fun, but sort of being part of this bigger team wasn't that interesting to them. And EA did a bit of its old classic EA bad behavior of the 90s, where they just they held off some of those royalties and cancelled that DLC or expansion or whatever it was they were working on. Put 2015 Inc. in a very, very difficult position to the point where they were basically about to have to join EA, sign with EA and become part of EA. And just as that was about to happen, I think the guy who told me the story, a guy called Drew, who was there at the time, said about a week before they got a knock on the door, obviously metaphorically speaking, by Bobby Kotick. And that is how Infinity Ward was formed. So, and that's how Call of Duty was originally called MOH Killer, Medal of Honor Killer. Designed to take down, and what they did is they hired the developers of the best Medal of Honor game to make Call of Duty, and Call of Duty was created. Now, obviously, Zampella and Weston fell out with Activision Blizzard around the development of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, and then ended up back at EA, different EA now, different people. They worked on Titanfall, which was my favorite story about Titanfall. This is a bit of a side story to that overall arc. Is I wanted to find out why Titanfall 2. Do you remember Titanfall 2 came out, and I need to remember the exact detail, in between Call of Duty and Battlefield? Like they probably sandwiched it in between. And there was a load of conspiracy theories online that it was EA trying to hurt Respawn, all this kind of stuff. Yeah. But no, it was Respawn's decision. And when I asked Respawn off the record over a drink why that happened, and they just went hubris. They believed they had the better game. And you know what? They did. But obviously you were between two juggernauts there, and in the end, Titanfall 2 found an audience over time. But anyway, that's sort of a side point. Their main point being that these people are supremely confident in what they're doing. They've delivered hits, and now here we are. That Zampella is back at EA making Battlefield. And you're putting it all on one person. He's not the creative director. He's not the person actually building the game. But there is a storyline here that I find quite entertaining. I'm not sure what my point was there, but I wasn't planning to tell that story on the.
That's like a Windows Canterbury Tales story. I like it. I think there's a lot to say for the fact that some of these creatives, they actually successfully managed to reinvent themselves in these genres over and over. And some don't. I think one of the things that I always go like franchises, of course, like Circana would express it in like dollars spent, but like these just lasting this long, like just the brand recognition of like the fact that we all have this touchstone of like one of those titles, one of those franchises, and we know exactly what we're thinking about, and we can all agree on in the same way that when we talk about Mario games or Zelda games, right? And so that longevity is. That is so incredible to accomplish, as the Americans would say. And so the fact that what that requires is people to constantly push the boundaries in their own sort of, in their part of the kitchen or whatever it is. And that's why I think you see a lot of these half-hearted attempts at games coming out. Like, I think, the teams behind X-Defiant and Concord are very sincere and creative, but, there's the only legacy that they leave is that they came and went, which is, that tells you how hard it is. Like even people at that level, these games are on paper totally fine, but they just don't resonate the way that the Battlefields and the Call of Duties do.
You need to coax people away, and you need to keep giving people stuff, and it requires such a level of investment. But let's talk about it. I've got some other numbers, right? So I tried to see how well Battlefield 6 is doing, and it's obviously. So Ampere estimates that 22 million people were in the beta for Battlefield 6. Newzoo's data is slightly higher. That tends to be the case, do we? But they're at 25 million. Newsy did some nice comparisons, actually. Battlefield 6 and Battlefield 2042, between those two games. So the peak daily active user for Battlefield 6 was 10.4 million for the beta, whereas Battlefield 2042's beta was 5.1 million. Again, that's Newsy data. The Battlefield 2042 beta was shorter than the Battlefield 6 beta by about half, actually. But the 2042 beta was 5.7 million total players, while Battlefield 6, 24.7 million. That's according to Newzoo. Ampere did some interesting different analysis. They estimate 1.7 million Steam pre-orders for Battlefield 6. They think it's going to do 5 million its first week. That's their estimate. They also point out the Steam user base is 25% bigger today than it was when Battlefield 2042 launched. But they said they did a share of Call of Duty players in July 2025 that also played Battlefield 6. So the people of Call of Duty and played both in July, but this is the Battlefield 6 beta, and didn't go back to Call of Duty in August. So 29% of Call of Duty players who also played Battlefield 6 didn't go back to Call of Duty in August, 24% of PlayStation, 48% on Steam. So if there's disruption to come, they think that disruption is going to come across all three platforms, but Steam in particular will have more than the rest. Video Game Insights, Call of Duty maintains a strong lead in terms of followers on Steam, but that's because of Call of Duty HQ. One of the confusing things about Steam data, by the way, is Call of Duty has a launcher called Call of Duty HQ, and Call of Duty HQ includes all of Call of Duty games, and so it's not really an accurate comparison. So Call of Duty HQ has a followers around 640 to 650,000. But the line is flat. They've not seen much growth in that, whereas Battlefield 6, this is Video Game Insights, have started from zero and they're now surpassing 200,000 followers. They're still far behind Call of Duty, but the slope of Battlefield 6 curve is very sharp and going upwards, and it's gaining momentum. Wishlist data, Call of Duty sits relatively flat at about 700,000 data, whereas Battlefield 6 is on 2 million wish lists by late September, actually. And this is multiple sources, but Video Game Insights is the one that shared this with me. 2.4 million wish lists for Battlefield 6. Obviously, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's worth noting that Call of Duty is more like an annual sports title today. So these sort of numbers don't really tell you much about Call of Duty. They just tell you about Battlefield 6, which has a lot of momentum behind it. Battlefield has certainly emerged with a lot of momentum. There's a lot of explosive excitement around it. This is a random small data point. It's not a big one. But Press Engine data reveals that there's been 13,088 articles written about Battlefield 6 since its reveal. That's actually 20 more articles than Black Ops 7. Black Ops 7 was actually unveiled almost a month and a half earlier than Battlefield 6. So the press are writing more about it. I mean, the press is hardly going to be an indicator of whether or not this game is going to do what's going to perform well and what isn't. But it's just more of a small data point, really. But all of that is to say, I think the only thing you can conclude from that is there's a lot of momentum for Battlefield. Call of Duty is difficult to tell. But certainly, the beta's gone down well. The hype is very high. But you all know this, Joost. It's really what happens after the launch, right? That's the key bit.
Purchase intent is just that. It's like, one day I will go to the gym. It's, the people's excitement is sort of like, commitment without commitment. Is that those tend to be useful indicators, and I appreciate you sharing some of these numbers. It gives me a sense too of like how other firms express these things, right? Like being on a wish list is this common metric, just to kind of argue the point. And 2 years ago, that would actually convert into whatever the number was, you would have 6% of people would actually buy the game. And a year ago, 3%, and probably this year, 1.5%. And so, in other words, increasingly wish list numbers become a weaker indicator for actual sales or projected sales. And so the same goes with everything else. And so the amount of articles being written is a good one. I like that one very much. It suggests that there's gatekeepers, smart people that watch the games industry and they help us vet these things. From a business perspective, that layer of voices has been hollowed out tremendously over the last couple of years, right? There's a lot of layoffs in the games press. Yeah. And so, what this all comes down to. So while this is very promising, I agree with you with the observation that there's a lot of momentum for Battlefield. It's probably because of the cyclical nature of Call of Duty that we now have this like much more sort of build up release coming up. It has to prove itself. The beta was promising. Okay, great. it hopefully can regain its magic. It also seems a little bit more memeable with all the sort of like, flying tanks and all the nonsense that you see. Like that suits things like TikTok and YouTube much better. And so all this to say is like, marketing becomes a key component in all of this, right? Like what can they do differently than Call of Duty does? And I think that's where they have the advantage.
Yeah, there's a few things. Call of Duty's in Game Pass as well. So I think subscription has an impact upon
so
like followers.
I don't have to choose. I already have that one.
And there's and the other component is one of the things about Battlefield is that it's I'm very mindful of what happened with X-Defiant. Like, X-Defiant started off very, very strongly as well. And loads of people from Call of Duty went and gave that a go. And there's no reason for they wouldn't give it Battlefield 6 a go. It comes out a whole month and a bit before Call of Duty launches. There's a nice big gap there. It's not like in the same 2-week period or anything. But, if Battlefield doesn't, if there isn't enough stuff in Battlefield, if it doesn't entice people for, if things don't work so well or whatever.
It's buggy.
They've got this window to really grab an audience and keep them there and entertain them and sustain them. And that could be a problem for Call of Duty. But equally, they have a nice window in which to lose all that audience. And, and we can talk about it's going to be a big launch. I think I can't see it not being a big launch there. But whether or not it will last, I think that's the hardest thing in live service. Actually, I think it's harder. I think we know it's hard. We saw with Concord, it's hard as a live service game to find an audience. I think Battlefield 6 will do that. I don't think that's not the problem it will face. I think the hardest thing to do, as what X-Defiant discovered and so many other games have discovered, is keeping hold of it, because even if they do entice huge amounts of Call of Duty players to go across, Call of Duty is where they've spent years and years of their time. It's where their audience is, where their community is. I know everyone says this every time, but that that's their home game, and trying to keep them away from that is going to be a difficult thing. But sometimes I think Call of Duty players do want something different. I remember Shams Jorjani, who was on the show earlier in the year, said something like 6 million of Helldivers 2 players came from Call of Duty, and that was not what they were aiming for at all. They actually got a bit caught up in trying to satisfy Call of Duty players in a game that was not made for Call of Duty players. And I think they sort of lost their way for a few months there as a result of that.
The way I read what you're saying, the way I hear it is as the incumbent, like a Call of Duty, as the number one, as you listed, like they can only lose. They can only secede market share during these moments. The question is like, how long and how sustainable is that? Like, what you see, particularly in these network-based games, is that people will find the new release of XYZ come out. And, we call them tourists. They just kind of wander off for 2 weeks and go play the new big release. So Ghost of Yotei comes out. Great. I'm going to play that for a couple of weeks. And then I finish the story. And then I'm going to go back to my multiplayer game with my friends that I play every night from 8 to 10 at night, whatever. And so that is the evergreen title that I join, but occasionally I take breaks from it. So then the mechanic very simply becomes, can I convince people to surrender their existing game, whether that's Call of Duty or Fortnite or whatever, and come join this other one and start a family here instead, right? Relocate. And that's a really tough thing to do. I think that's why games have a very short window. The risk profile, particularly on free-to-play, but just multiplayer games, is incredibly difficult nowadays. Like X-Defiant is a perfect example of, you had 225,000 concurrent users. This is one of the breakout successes for Ubisoft. And, it wasn't great. It just didn't really deliver, and they lost it and they never got it back. And so you only have that moment. So the odds are against you in that sense, but it's likely that people will kind of wander off away from Call of Duty in favor of something new, something that's a little bit of a different thing. And that's a material threat to Call of Duty, I would say.
Good luck. I mean, I do like seeing two games battling it out. They're both going to be fine.
Oh, yeah.
And, a bit of competition can generate a lot more excitement around a genre, can spark some innovation. I'm not saying that, people were being lazy in the first place, but there's something about having a rival that just, adds a little bit.
It keeps everybody honest, like it's the thing is like the unspoken part of like creative effort is that, of course, we're all trying to make the best games. Like, and you see this with Silk Song, in the last couple of weeks, like, these amazing things that come out. But in my experience, creative people are hugely competitive. on the same level as athletes, right? And so I'm all for it. I think it's wonderful that there is different versions. I think, the shooter genre is such a competitive category overall. It's, it's one of the red hot components always. And to be the number one in there or to participate in a meaningful way, like what an incredible accomplishment. So I like it. I think it's very exciting. I look forward to Battlefield 6. I am curious what Call of Duty 7 will do and how that's going to play out this holiday season. But, as a consumer, you can't really lose. That's the upside.
No, that's a good thing. Joost, I've taken up all your time. We're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. I love having you on, and I would love to have you back. I genuinely can't believe it's taken me this long to invite you on.
Save the best for last.
Episode 58, I think this is.
I appreciate it, Chris.
Everyone at home, that's it for today's episode of the Game Business Show. We'll be back next week with more news, analysis, and interviews, including our big delayed show, celebrating 30 years of PlayStation in Europe. It was meant to go live on Tuesday, but it's a bit of a monster, so bear with us. We need a little bit longer to get it right. We've also launched our paid subscription tier service this week as well, which includes on a Monday, you'll get a micro version of the Game Business Show where we go through the biggest news stories of the last week in a sort of condensed, concise way. We also send out a newsletter as well if you're not somebody who likes to listen or watch. If you want to just get that in the newsletter form, that comes out on a Monday. And there'll be some other subscription bonuses. In fact, for the 30-year PlayStation Europe video, there is an extended stuff for you to be able to dive into and enjoy. Until next time, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you again soon.